Change isn't just coming, it's already here. This is Ask for Change podcast, hosted by leadership expert Meredith Elliott Powell. Brings you weekly conversations with leaders and experts who are redefining success in a world of disruption. Let's begin today's journey and turn uncertainty into your competitive advantage.
Now, that's what we are all about here at the Ask for Change podcast. I'm Meredith Elliott Powell, your host, and I am super excited about our guest today. He is a long-time friend. A long-time friend, but more importantly, somebody who is just brilliant, really brilliant in the industry. I want to welcome Chris Comeaux to the podcast. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me, Meredith. And I just want to echo those comments. You are a longtime friend, mentor, coach. Just someone I just feel blessed to have had in my life. And gosh, there's so many other people I now would say the same, but you were the lead of that because you introduced me to many other people who now become friends and mentors and colleagues as well. So super thankful for the way you came into my life many years ago. There's so many interesting connections, even with your time back in First Citizens Bank, and even how that kind of changed the trajectory of my life.
I know we have been connected for a long time, but something I want the audience to know before I have you do the intro of yourself is that I know that you have been a CEO, that you've started companies, but you're also one of the most I don't know anybody as dedicated to growth and learning as you are. So, as you know, I want you to talk about your book. I want you to talk about leadership, and I want you to tell the audience, basically, for those that don't know you, who are you? What are your passions, and how has uncertainty and change impacted your life?
Wow. Well, thanks, Meredith. Well, first off, I'm a husband and a dad of 5 kids. I have my amazing partner, Disha, my wife, and we have 5 amazing kids. I actually married off our oldest son, and so I actually did the ceremony. That was super special. In fact, the ceremony was on the same beach where I proposed to my wife, and now we have our 2 other boys engaged. So it's a really awesome season of life. From a vocational standpoint, I'm a CPA by trade. I worked for KPMG, Pete Morwick, straight out of college. Just amazing experience. Really kind of grew up in corporate America in early age. And so after KPMG, worked in the Fortune 50 world in a company called Cooper Industries. I had an executive development program, traveled all over the world. And for a little Southern boy from South Louisiana, it just was amazing life experience working in other cultures. I worked in France and Switzerland and Germany for like months on end. And so it's just great life experience. But faith is a large portion of my life, and I had kind of a spiritual renewal, and I was climbing the corporate ladder, and kind of that Stephen Covey quote many, many years ago, you may be climbing that ladder, but it could be actually leaning against the wrong wall. And that quote just was really haunting me. And my wife was from Pensacola at the time. We were living in Houston, but I was traveling internationally. And she pointed to the Help Wanted ads, and she said, I don't know why, but you're supposed to look at this. And that was actually hospice. So at the age of 25, I became the CFO for a hospice in Pensacola. And I fell in love with just healthcare and hospice in particular. Now, backing up just for a second, my very first job at KPMG, they poured a ton of leadership training into us as very young people. I was pretty young when I graduated from college. My first leadership book was Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits. And so that hunger for leadership and learning, luckily, was embedded very early on. I had some amazing mentors at KPMG, Pete Morwick. And I think generally too, just as a child, my mom tells the stories that, why was my favorite question at a very young age? And my nickname was Busy Bee-Body. And so I think I've always been blessed with a high energy and just a natural curiosity. So then those mentors, incredible books, being in the right organizations at a time in corporate America where they're starting to figure out investing in your people, and then finally finding my passion in hospice, all of that has coalesced to what I do today. And so I'm the CEO of 2 companies, Teleas Consulting Group. We work with lots of different organizations, but still a lot of healthcare and hospices. And then Teleas Collaborative Network, which is like a co-op of community-based nonprofit hospices. And the cool thing is we don't own these hospices. So it's almost like, again, a co-op. So we have influence and we don't have authority. And it's a really interesting way to create value. And really what it comes down to is pouring into our people who pour into the people in these hospices and trying to help them improve outcomes locally, because what they do from a mission standpoint is super, super important. And then you kind of touched on my book.
Yeah.
About 2 years ago, I was probably tired of frustrating people. I'm a bit of a geek, as you said. I'm always learning, I'm always growing, I'm always reading. And people would say, "Hey, Chris, I know you're always reading something. What would be a book I would start with?" And I could never give them one. I'd like, "Well, go with these five." And I just see that look on their face. They say the typical CEO has about 20 books in their bedstand and they won't read one of them. And so finally, I wrote the book where I feel like just start here. I'm a CPA by trade again. And so, really good CPAs take a whole bunch of information and they organize it in a way that is really a whole bunch of data, if you will, and they organize it in a way where it becomes information. In a way, that was my offering via this book. It's like a meta framework for what is leadership, hence the term, the anatomy of leadership. And just like if you're going to go in any healthcare occupational field, they're going to teach you human anatomy. Well, that was the metaphor that I went for with this book. It's like a meta framework, almost like a table of contents for what is leadership. And you nailed it again about just my hunger for learning and growth. There's, again, lots of reasons why it's still that. I had another mentor later in my life, Dr. Lee Thayer, and he would say, learning equals growth and growth equals life. And that adage
Yeah.
just I just totally bought into that. Again, and kind of a coalescing of a lot of things in my life. And so I'm always learning, always growing. So we then launched the podcast called The Anatomy of Leadership, of which you've been a wonderful guest and even some of your friends, because the idea of the book is a table of contents, right? You say it's probably 1 foot thick, but also 20 miles wide.
Yeah.
Now, via that podcast, I bring amazing guests and I'm learning and growing even via the podcast.
One thing that I just love about the anatomy of leadership is that to me, it's the foundational pieces. And without the foundational pieces, you can't really grow. Like it's kind of like, I think about like we live in this AI type of world and AI is fabulous and all the things that AI can do. But if you don't have the basics, if you can't build relationships, if you can't walk into a room and work that room, if you don't understand how to influence people, if you don't understand the fundamentals of communication, all of that is just going to be, it's never going to be as effective as it could possibly be. And anatomy of leadership works that way too. I feel like what you did was you put together basically the fundamentals. And from here, if you get the anatomy of leadership, from there, then you're positioned to grow and to expand.
That's exactly right. And I love what you poked on because I, like you, I'm super enthusiastic about AI, but as with anything, there is always a shadow side. And the shadow side of AI is the facade of, I've actually mentioned this in our recent podcast as well. Like you could literally kind of AI anything, right? And you could get this amazing outline and it gives you the false impression, well, now I have mastered that subject. No, you just have a much easier way to grasp something. But true mastery is a journey. It's in the actual improvisation and the actual doing and the execution. And so you're so right. The fundamentals is to give you the fundamentals to enable you on a day-to-day basis to become masterful at it. AI can be an absolute accelerator. It's a gift, but it's not a panacea. It's not like the Matrix where you could download it, at least not yet.
Yeah. Yeah, but even if it goes there, I think you're making such a great point because there's the journey of learning, there's the journey of failing, there's the journey of building confidence, right? Like this. So this morning, the reason we started at 7:30 was I play tennis on Friday mornings at 6, and I was on the tennis court this morning, and it has been a long slog for me. I did not learn to start playing tennis until I was 55 years old, and I have failed. Oh my God, I have failed so much. But today morning, I played really well. I hit everything really well, and there's so much. Like I would never have the sweetness of that had I not had that journey ahead of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And I'm like just in awe going, you said tennis and not pickleball.
No, tennis. Yeah. No.
That's awesome.
Exactly. So listen, basically I'm on a mission in life. I mean, I really am mission driven now. I want people to start to believe that uncertainty always leads to opportunity, that if they could lean into the shifts that are happening in the marketplace, their greatest life, their greatest purpose will be just beyond the obstacle in front of them. But we are living in challenging times. I mean, Gartner released a report that said the pace of change has increased 183% in just 4 years. We're moving 183% faster than we used to. 4 out of 5 employees report being burned out, stressed out. They cannot handle any more change. And guess what? More change is coming. And I feel like the biggest rub out there right now is that leaders are continuing to lead the same way they've always led in a world that is just moving more rapidly and changing. I mean, imagine if leaders led in the Industrial Revolution the same way they led in the agricultural age. So, what are you seeing on the leadership front? What do you see that's working? What do you see that isn't working? What do you think leaders need to be doing in these challenging times?
Well, first off, kudos to you because I think it is your cause and purpose of waking people up to this. Hey, I'm a bit of a history geek as well, and about every 100 years, there's a huge
Yeah.
bolus of change, and we were alive at that time. I have a funny slide that I use quite frequently. Is it's a 1900 on the street in Chicago, and it says, "Can you find the one car?" And 10 years later, same street, and it says, "Can you find the one horse?" So totally flip
Wow.
within 10 years, and it's a good visual. We go, "Oh, that's cute." No, we're alive at one of those times right now. In fact, what we've tried to do internally, Dr. Thayer, again, my mentor, was all about lexicon, which is literally the words that we use. So we've tried to actually banish change from our lexicon, and rather we talk about the innovation. In fact, this year we actually came up with a new word, which is maintain ovation, which is like, sometimes the work that we're doing, which we're always improving. So it's got kind of that improvement and that maintenance. So think about the lexicon within your organization, because quite often when people bring up the word change, it just has that negative feel and connotation because of the pace, everything you're talking about, the burnout, etc. I love how you're just flipping it, going ask for change.
Yes.
And I think like when you're asking about, okay, well, what do leaders do with this? I think it's an interesting, it's almost like I'm going to sound like I'm speaking two different ways. One is don't forget the fundamentals. And that may feel like, oh, well, you're saying do what I've always done. Well, I don't know. Do you really know what the fundamentals are? What you may have been doing may have come out of bad habits, something you've seen somewhere else. So make sure you're building your house on a strong foundation of good fundamentals. That would be the first thing. But then the second thing, I'm a student of leadership, always reading, researching, bringing other podcast guests. And there are two opposing views. Or I shouldn't even frame them that way, but at face value, you would think there are two opposing views. But there's a guy named Tom Foster, and he's been a student of a guy named Elliot Jacks. And it's about this concept of the levels of work. We live at a time where hierarchy feels like, because we've seen hierarchy done bad, where literally it's just about power, oppressing people, etc. There is a natural hierarchy even in nature. And so that's the whole concept of levels of work. Like the job of the CEO is not the job of the person on the front line. And yes, we get reality TV shows and the boss goes and actually on the front line. Once a year, I still go out and try to actually go and see the care by the bedside.
Yeah.
But my job is not to do that on a day-to-day basis. So the different levels have different roles. And so understanding that, but there's a whole nother school of thought. If you ever heard Frederick Laloux, and about this concept of teal organizations, which is the simplest or maybe the pop culture way is, oh, that's a flat organization, like Tony Heisinger at Zappos before it got purchased by Amazon. But even in his supposedly flat organization, there was still structure and roles. And so it was really almost more of a marketing gimmick than the reality. But yet the true maybe learning lesson there is you want an organization that is flatter than 10 and 20 layers. In fact, the concept of requisite organization that Tom Foster went and learned from Elliot Jacks is that there is an optimal level. And if you get too many levels, and we see this in healthcare, Meredith, and you and I used to have breakfast conversations about this,
Yeah.
these over bloated bureaucracies in healthcare, innovation is not going to come from that. So again, it sounds like two opposing thoughts, but there is a requisite number of layers you should have in your organization. And generally, the flatter it is, although there's probably mission impossible for it to be completely flat, what that does is it allows your organization to be more nimble, more adaptive, but it has to be based upon some incredible fundamentals, like people that are super competent. What are your true values in your organization? How are you pouring into your people? Like one of our values of TCN is leadership. And I meet with all new employees within the first month, and we talk about every person in this organization is a leader. Now, some people have management responsibility, other people reporting to them, time approval, time and expense approvals, etc. But every person is a leader. At a minimum, you're leading yourself. You might be leading a project. You're interacting with many of our clients that we serve. So it takes leadership skills throughout the whole organization. And so it's kind of our way of mixing those two. Now, my job as the CEO is I have to be looking out, and there are many other things I do differently than the people serving our members on a day-to-day basis. But if we can empower our people with that thought process, we're going to be more nimble, which takes us back full circle. Living in great times of change, you can't have the color by numbers plan, right? It is
Yeah.
a bit about, yes, you have to have a plan, but it's a whole lot about being opportunistic, improvisational. Doesn't mean by flying by the seat of your pants. In fact, I'll tell you a quick adage, Meredith. The coolest thing I've done years ago, one of Dr. Thayer's students invited me to be part of a kind of a culmination of a 1-year learning opportunity he had with his team. And the guy who was facilitating it taught at the Army War College. And the whole day of this the learning lesson was on Antietam battlefield. So he was like taking
Oh,
a history lesson, but all immersed in leadership lessons at the same time. And so I kind of cornered this guy because imagine he actually taught logistics at the Army War College. And I had one question for him. I said, is it all about preparation or improvisation? And you could probably guess his answer, right? The answer was both. He
hmm
said, we actually bring more material. We go through more scenarios than anyone else on the battlefield. But once the battle occurs, a lot of that goes out of the window. But the improvisation is masterful because it's coming from preparation. And I think that is a really good adage of what is going to be necessary with these next couple of years. We can't just kind of show up and go, well, we're just going to do this thing by the seat of our pants. No, it's built upon incredible foundation. What is your culture? How do you talk about these things? But at the end of the day, it is going to be a whole lot of improvisation, but been pulling from all that preparation and culture that you've been building.
Yeah, when you think about it, I mean, really, life really works that way. I mean, think about going on a sales call. I mean, you prep for it, but the truth is, anything that could happen in the middle of that sales call, any sports game you play. I mean, professional athletes practice like crazy, but at the end of the day, they don't know what's going to happen in, in the match. And so, what? So I'm curious, and because I'm really fascinated by this, that why we continue as human beings, but I'm going to use leaders as the example, we're continuing on a treadmill to do things that are not working. And we know they're not working. I think the statistic, I'm loaded with statistics because I've been researching this quite a bit, but I think only 36% of employees today feel that their company is prepared to handle the change and is giving them the tools they need to be effective to manage the amount of change that is coming at them. So why are leaders on that treadmill for the most part? I realize that's a generalization, and not and why haven't we embraced the fact that things need to shift and need to be different? What are
Great
your
question.
Yeah.
Great question. And I want to answer your question, but I want to go back just for something you said about the sales call, because I think it ties into your question. I imagine when you went play tennis this morning, you had a blast.
Yes.
And you had a blast because you were prepared and you've been training, but there's no doubt you weren't like following some script in that actual tennis match. I think we've lost the joy in the day-to-day improvisation of our job. Like, are you
So
dreading that sales call? Are you dreading that meeting with your team? Or
yeah.
you're like, you know what? I am not perfectly prepared, but I am prepared. I'm prepared a whole lot more than most. Recently, I went to a state conference and went and work out at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I went and had some quiet time on the beach, and I didn't see one other person at that conference. And in some level, I'm like, okay, I'm preparing myself a little bit better than my peers and my colleagues. So it's not perfect preparation, but in that preparation, having joy on a day-to-day basis. And I think it comes back to your thing, Meredith, is that, employees are like, I don't think my employer is prepared. Well, you turn on social media at night and all the
Yeah.
crazy commentary, and then you look at your organization and go, I don't think they're prepared. Well, there's probably no perfectly prepared organization, but can we just make it fun? We should be pouring into our people, the fundamentals, the things I was talking about a couple of moments ago, and then make it fun on a day-to-day basis. Because if we're just going to grunt through it, I think there is this almost human condition right now. It probably has some cognitive dissonance, but because of all the social media influences, I will say it's human beings living in the screensaver mode, like literally just going from one task to another. Like, I don't know where the future is going, so I'm just going to keep doing the thing. In fact, there's we use this movie scene in some of the training we do. Actually, it wasn't a movie; it was a TV series. You probably remember Lost many years ago.
Oh
Um,
yeah, sure.
there was a scene in there where they had to keep pressing this button, and they didn't know what would happen if they quit pressing the button. And John Locke, which you and I have a friend named John Locke, but John Locke, the character in the series, said, "You're not going to press the button." And the guy literally tried to fight with him, and he's like, "We got to see what happens if you don't press the button." And we use it as kind of a funny to go,
Yeah.
guys, How many of you is that your job on a daily basis? I don't have a freaking clue what happens when I quit pressing the button, but I'm just going to keep pressing the button. And unfortunately, that is a lot of people, and there's no joy in that. There's no passion, there's no purpose in that. And I think it's our job as leaders to push against that status quo. Um, Dr. Thayer, my mentor, used to say that great leaders hunt the status quo like it is the enemy. And I know that sounds almost harsh, but what he's saying is that human condition to want to go in that screensaver mode is pretty strong. And
Yes.
I think the stronger the change and the overwhelmness, let me just go just doom scroll on social media. But waking people up to joy and passion and bringing that into their jobs, I think that's absolutely key for us to not only navigate this change, but you and I both agree that one of the best actually quotes ever, the best way to predict the future is to create it. So
Yeah.
instead of sitting back, letting things happen to you, awaken that where people can shape where their future is going.
Yeah, one thing I not only think it takes the joy out of it, but it's also I talk a lot about this when I talk about Ask for Change, is that we're living in such an odd time because you need to have these fundamentals. I mean, one of the biggest pieces when I started researching uncertainty was the people who navigated it beautifully had a very strong vision and a very strong sense of values. And they lived that vision. They focused on that vision. They were not married to the path, but they knew where they were going to wind up. The second is they made every decision according to their core values. It's who they surrounded themselves with. It's how they chose, technology. It's how they chose everything, even if technology was the rolling pin back in the 1700s. But at the same time, you cannot create a plan because you do not know what is going to happen. I mean, you have no idea what is going to happen. So you can't have this plan that you're so rigid to, because the world may move a direction you don't want to. So the answers to where you need to go are by being present. They're by listening. Your customers will tell you the path. Your employees will tell you the path. Your peers in the industry will tell you the path. But if you're so worried about, you're so angry at what's going on, or you're trying to be like, no, 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 we always do 7 before 8. We always do 7 before 8. We can't do 8 before 7. You're going to miss every clue that is revealing how to thrive in an uncertain marketplace.
That is very well said. In fact, 2 key points. One that goes back again to that wonderful lesson that the guy from the Army War College, right? If you're so tied to your preparation and your past systems, like holding them so tightly, that is really almost like you're using that as a security blanket. That is not using the wisdom of those tools to navigate your future. And I love the other thing you're poking on. Until COVID, every year in my hospice career, I've gone out on visits. It gets, the Toyota production system calls it the gimbal walk. You go to Gemba, you go see for yourself. In fact, recently I shared one of the awesome stories. Dr. Thayer was on a project at General Motors, and this is when Toyota was starting to kick our butts in quality. And actually, so GM had put together a lot of great consultants. So Dr. Thayer was one of many on this team. And so the GM executives had this big boardroom set up with all of these kind of charts and everything. And they were waiting. They were actually incredibly surprised that one of the key guys at Toyota agreed to come. And so they had all these consultants, and the guy from Toyota shows up, and in Japanese, he walks in the boardroom and literally says, "What the hell is this?" And they're like, "Well, we got all the stuff prepared for you." And he said, "Where's the factory floor?" And that is such an awesome lesson. Take me to where the action is. All your charts and all this stuff you're not going to figure your way out of this. And so I think in many of our businesses, who's your customer? Where is the action in your organization? And to go and actually listen, not necessarily to critique. Yes, it's great to affirm and reward and recognize when you do that. There are multiple purposes you can solve with that. But during great times of change, how can you approach each of those things like you've never seen them before? Like you're rediscovering something, listening to the customer in new ways. And yes, you should be studying some of the things about, what is the industry information. In fact, I'm pretty stoked, Meredith. I'm so tired of getting stuck on airplanes. I am taking a train to New York for a keynote next week, just to try to make it different. I'm gonna work the whole way. But my keynote, we've been doing about 7 years of research, and we've come to the conclusion there are 8 thematic challenges. We actually use your skeptic fees tool.
Nice.
And so And out of that, there are 8 thematic challenges. And so if you know the challenges, so you need that intel for where you're going. But the challenge doesn't tell me what to do. The challenge tells me what the cross currents and the trade winds are going to be on this trip. So then I can plot a course amongst that.
And that is predicting the future by creating the future. You know, Chris, it is hard to believe, but we are at the end of this podcast. And I really want our listeners to be able to buy a copy of Anatomy of Leadership. But more importantly, I want them to follow you. I want them to listen to your podcast and listen to the work that you're doing. I feel like I follow Chris because it takes the work out of it for me. I always know he's sifting through so much information, and the ones that he recommends are the things I need to be listening to. So how do our listeners get a hold of you? How do they find you? And how do they definitely find your book?
Yep, you bet. So we've got our Teleos, so TELEIOSCN, like CharlieNancy.org. The Anatomy of Leadership is our leadership podcast. And so you could go any podcast platform, just look up the Anatomy of Leadership. And then the other that we do is more healthcare industry information is called TCN Talks. Again, it's on any podcast platform. We'll get you links and we can put all that in the show notes.
Yeah, let's put all of that in the show notes, and let's not let this go so long. Next time we'll have you back in a few months and follow up on this conversation, because I feel like we just scratched the surface. But I'll see all of you right back here next week for the show that we really master. How do you turn all of this uncertainty into your greatest competitive advantage and learn to ask for change? We'll see you next week.